Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to all of you. Namaste, assalamu alaikum. This is the 57th edition of our Zoom public meeting for 56 unbroken, continuous weeks. We have been here every single Sunday without fail. In the past year and 2 months, we have featured about 168 presenters from all parts of the world, speaking on 56 topics. We wish to thank all those who have contributed in one way or the other on this ongoing Pan-Indo-Caribbean project. Our chairperson this evening or tonight, depending on where you're located, is again Janine Gilhari from Belize, a young businesswoman who has her own fashion brand called House of Gilhari. She graduated in 2019 with a bachelor's in fashion design and fashion business management. Ms. Gilhari held the title of Miss India Belize and represented Belize in the Miss India Worldwide Beauty Pageant in Malaysia. Ms. Gilhari, welcome and please chair the meeting.
Thank you for the introduction, Dr. Mahabir. Good night, good morning, good evening. Namaste, assalamu alaikum to all of you, depending on your time zone, because as you know, this is a meeting with people from all over the world, especially on occasions like today when we do joint meetings with the Amina Ghafoor Institute. We take this opportunity to remind everybody that the COVID-19 pandemic is rampant all over the world. So, please take all the necessary precautions to save your life and that of your loved ones. We also wish to, we wish to say a shout out to our brothers and sisters in Trinidad and Tobago on Happy Emancipation Day today, which is a national holiday in that country. Interestingly enough, I think, if I'm not mistaken, this year, Belize has officially started taking Emancipation Day today as well. And we also are currently monitoring the situation in South Africa in the wake of the recent threats of violence, looting, and burning of buildings. We have scheduled a Zoom public meeting on South Africa for Sunday, August 15th, so that's 2 weeks from today. And as I had mentioned in previous meetings, this is a forum being hosted by the Indo-Caribbean Cultural Center, which is a legally registered and publishing company operating since 2010. And as I mentioned a while ago, on this occasion, we are partnering with the Amina Ghafoor Institute for the study of indentureship and its legacies. Now, the Ghafoor Institute is an educational activity of the Pluto Educational Trust. Now, in order to continue this program and to make it bigger and better, as with all things, I'd like to take this moment to invite anybody, if they have any suggestions or opinions on how we might improve our meetings, please contact Dr. Mahabir for those details. And also, if the donation is within your possibilities, you can see Dr. Mahabir as well. Ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce to you our moderator for tonight. Once again, the lively and exciting Ms. Bindu Diakinat Maharaj of Trinidad and Tobago. Bindu has been an educator for the past 25 years, and she's also a published creative writer. So Bindu, welcome, and please take over.
Thank you very much, Janine Gilhari from Belize, for providing me with this opportunity to platform once again. Ladies and gentlemen, good night, good afternoon. Welcome again to our weekly forum. Today's forum is once again, as Janine would have said, our joint and collaborative program with the Amina Ghafoor Institute, and we always look forward to having this platform, given that we see so many new names and new faces, which we always welcome dearly. So thank you again. Before we start our program, I would like to go through a few house rules, as we can say. We should all, at all times, audience members, please keep your mics on mute. If you look at the bottom left-hand corner of your screen, you would see a microphone icon. Just tap or click on it, and you would see that it's muted. This this is necessary because at the end, it does create feedback as well as make your private conversations accessible to us throughout the world, which is not something that, you know, you would want promoted. Another thing is there would be a question and answer segment at the end of the show, at the end of the 3 presentations. And at that time, there's a little structure for that. So what I would like you all to do, for anyone at any time, if you have any questions that you would like to ask, if you go to the bottom of your screen, you would see a reaction button, that smiley face there with the plus sign on it. When you click on it, you would see the bar underneath called raise hand. You click on that and I would see you on a waiting list so that I can take you in that necessary sequence, right? So as I said, once again, welcome to our show and welcome. Please note, it's our joint meeting with the Amina Gafur Institute, which is an educational activity of the Pluto Educational Trust. So let's move on now to our presentations and our topic. Our topic is entitled The Sepoy Migrants in the Caribbean and Belize During Indentureship. Now, for many of us, that word sepoy alone is something new for many of us. And today, not only are we going to learn about what it means, but we're going to learn the history and the context of this quite remarkable group of people that are part of our ancestry and our history. Now, who is a sepoy? A sepoy is an Indian soldier employed by the European power, in this case, the British. Now, the Sepoy Mutiny, well, when we hear the word mutiny, we already know what's happening there. So the Sepoy Mutiny was a widespread rebellion against British rule in India in 1857, also called the Indian Revolution or the First War of Independence. The uprising began with a mutiny of sepoys of the British Army, which erupted mainly in the upper Gangetic Plain and Central America, Central India. Now, this mutiny took place in the middle of Indian indentured emigration to the West Indies, and in the same places where most of these immigrants left for other parts of the British Empire. Now, in the aftermath of this unsuccessful rebellion, sepoys and civilians of all castes, classes, and religions alike, they suffered executions, confiscations, and imprisonments, and many of them fled from their homes or went into hiding or exiled overseas in the Andaman Islands. Archival and historical literature does not shed clear light on where most of these Sepoy War veterans went. Where did the 70,000 ex-Sepoys go? And by what means did they leave India? These are the questions that we will be addressing this afternoon/tonight. Now, we have 3 presenters, 2 of which would be live, 1 in the form of a video presentation. So Ravan will be sharing that for us. So just after I am finished with introducing Dr. Rajeshwari Dutt from India. Now, Dr. Dutt is an assistant professor in history at the Indian Institute of Technology in Mandi, with a focus on Latin America and the Caribbean. She's the author of 2 books on Maya caciques in Yucatan and the Belize struggle for order in Belize during Yucatan's caste war. One of Dr. Dutt's research interests is exploring India's historical connections to the Circum-Caribbean region. Now, as I said, she will not be live with us. However, our pre-recorded video will now be played by our IT manager, Ravan. Ravan?
Hi, my name is Rajeshwari Dutt, and I'm currently a faculty in the Indian Institute of Technology, Mandi, which is located in the very scenic foothills of the Himalayas in India. I'm really grateful to Dr. Kumar Mahavir for making this virtual presentation possible, and I look forward very much to sharing my findings with you about the topic of Sepoy Mutiny and Belize. Now, before we start actually on the topic, I want to just show you a few locations that I'll be referring to in this presentation. So first, this is Belize. It's known as British Honduras, also in the 19th century. And you can see that it is sharing a border with Yucatan. Yucatan is the southeastern peninsula of Mexico. This is the Rio Hondo, and it's the natural fluvial boundary between Mexico and Belize. But like most rivers, it connects far more than it divides. And for centuries, there was a lot of back and forth movement in terms of people's goods and even ideas between Mexico and Belize. There are a few places I also want to quickly point out to you. So one is Corozal, the other is Orange Walk. These are important frontier towns along this border region where a lot of Mexican immigrants settle in the wake of in the mid-19th century. And this is Bacalar. It's an important post between Yucatan and Belize. Now, I think one of the interesting things about the 1857 Sepoy Mutiny is that it was, in fact, one of the world's first global media events, right? So in the summer of 1857, the news of the uprising in India became headline news across the world. And if you look at how the news was transmitted, you can actually see how the news of the mutiny would have traveled from India to the Caribbean. So this is a map of telegraph lines, and you can see news would first have gone from India to Europe to London. From there, it would go across to the United States, to New York. From there, it would be further distributed to the Caribbean and to Latin America. Now, one of the common things among all the English language newspaper depictions of the 1857 mutiny is that all of them emphasize native atrocities. So all of them represent the mutineers as savages, as killing innocent women and children. And so there's a larger sort of depiction of the mutiny as really a result of native atrocities in India. There's a reason, I think, for this kind of uniformity that we see across these newspapers, which is that most of the English language newspapers were basing their reports on what was being published in English language newspapers in India. And those English language newspapers in India were the mouthpieces of the colonial community in India, of the British in India, and so they were pro-British. And so what you have, therefore, is that kind of news being replicated and some depiction being replicated across the English language newspapers. And you find this in the British Caribbean newspapers as well. When you get to Latin America, though, there is a little bit of a difference. So in Latin America, the Spanish language newspapers are actually much more critical of the British in India. And in fact, the emphasis in those newspapers is on the British mismanagement of India as the real cause for the uprising and not native atrocities. So there's this really interesting contrast that we can see in this region. Belize as a circum-Caribbean region is very unique in that it is both part of that Central American, Latin American dynamic. It's also part of the British Caribbean. And so you kind of see both strains of thought in how the 1857 uprising is seen in Belize. Now, to really understand how the uprising is affects the Belize, I think we also should look at what is the context in Belize in the mid-19th century. And for that, we need to also look at what was going on in Mexico. So I showed you the map where I showed you how Mexico and Belize share a border. And what happens in Mexico in the mid-19th century in Yucatan is that there is a really violent uprising of Maya people against the Mexican government, which is known as the caste war of Yucatan. Now, caste, of course, in Latin America has a very different connotation than caste in India. Caste in Latin America is much more about race and ethnicity and lineage in that sense, and so it's very different from the Indian caste system. In Yucatan, the Guerra de Castas, or the caste war, was unusually long. It was from 1847 till 1901, and it had Maya rebels going up against the Mexican state. Now, in Belize, it had a couple of important repercussions. One was that there was a lot of frontier violence in Belize as a result of the caste war. So I showed you those towns, Corozal and Orange Walk. They were really badly affected and faced a lot of violence as a result of being caught in the crossfire among rival Maya groups. Now, the caste war also had one more effect on Belize, which is it changed the population of Belize. So the population of Belize kind of increases tenfold as a result of the caste war. It also changes the economy of Belize. And I'll just come to that in a second. So one of the sort of, if you think about context in Belize that made the caste war so important in Belize, but also made the 1857 uprising have an impact on Belize. I think for both of these to have an impact on Belize, there was one common reason, and that was the labor shortage in Belize in the mid-19th century. So Belize, unlike other plantation economies of the Caribbean, was actually a timber economy, right? So most of Belize's economy was driven, particularly before the mid-19th century, by extraction of logwood and mahogany. And prior to the emancipation of slaves in the 1830s, most of that work was being done by enslaved people. Now, after the 1830s, when slavery is abolished, there is a lot of shortage of labor because of emancipation. And that creates one context, right, which is, I think, one reason why the 1850s is such an important turning point. The mid-19th century is such an important turning point for Belizean economy as well. So that's one context. The second context is the effect of the caste war of Yucatan on Belize. So I talked about the number of people, right, who were moving in from Yucatan into Belize as a result of the caste war. And so what happens is that these people come into Belize and they bring with them their agricultural know-how. So when the Maya and Mestizo people come from Mexico into Belize, they start making their plantations and start growing agricultural crops. And in fact, they become very successful. By 1870, Belize is actually exporting sugar. So this is a very important development in Belize. And what happens is that with these immigrants coming into Belize, Belize is able to unlock its agricultural potential. But there is a problem, right, which is that most of these plantations are along these northern frontier regions, which are very unstable because of the caste war violence that's happening in those border regions. And so this labor, right, which works on these sugar plantations, which is mostly Maya Mestizo labor, is also unstable labor, right? So you have several moments where these labor actually flee from these plantations because of the war on the borders, and they cross back into Mexico. And so there's a great deal of fluidity of movement of this labor in and out of this frontier region, and this creates a lack of reliable labor on those plantations. What also happens over time is that the Belizean settler elite, the landowning elite, begin to control most of these sugar plantations, even though, right, the major workers on those plantations are still, immigrants from Mexico. So this is another important context here, which is that at this moment when Belize is poised to unlock its agricultural potential, at this moment, right, it's also facing all these severe labor shortages, instability of labor, unreliability of labor, and is looking for, right, a solution to this problem. And I think this is really critical, right, in understanding like what are the contexts, right, that is setting up Belize to be, you know, in a very specific way impacted by what's going on in India, right? Now, one of the interesting responses across the Caribbean when the 1857 uprising happens in India is that there's a lot of debate over the importation of ex-sepoys, of disbanded sepoys from India into the Caribbean as indentured servants. There's a lot of variation also among the Caribbean regions in terms of this. So for instance, places like Trinidad, Demerara are much more accepting of the idea of sepoys coming in to those regions. Places like Jamaica vacillate a bit more. Guyana is more resistant towards accepting sepoys, and there's a reason for this variation, right? So on the one hand, the idea of bringing in all these additional labor from India was very desirable, right, from a labor perspective, and so a lot of places wanted that. At the same time, there was also a lot of fear that bringing in sepoys would create instability in the plantations, especially if there was any kind of replication of what happened in India, happened in those plantations. And so there was a lot of fear of what would happen if a lot of sepoys came from India. Would they improve the economy, or would it actually threaten the order in those regions? Belize is interesting because in Belize, the landowning elite at this point control the legislative assembly, and they are very keen on importing the sepoys from India into Belize. There's also a little bit of a dissonance, which is while these landowning elite are really interested in bringing these people in, the colonial officials are much more skeptical of this project. In any case, what happens is that the parliament approves 1,000 sepoys to be brought into Belize from India, right? And that's quite a good number of people to be brought in. But when we look at the censuses, right, we just don't see those numbers appearing in the censuses. So if you look at the 1861 census, there are just 9 coolies, right, which is East Indians, who appear in the census. If you look at 1871 census, you just see 10. So the numbers are just really, really low, right? And now these low numbers can be interpreted in a couple of ways, right? One is that perhaps that's just how many people came into Belize, that the number who came into Belize really was very low, right? The second interpretation is that it's possible that when once these ex-sepoys and their families arrived in Belize, they may have taken up work as independent farmers or fishers, right, rather than as indentured laborers on plantations. And that may be one reason why the census records don't really reflect, a larger number of East Indians in Belize at this point. But regardless, the labor shortage in Belize that I talked about, right, still makes it very keen on getting labor from India. And so you see that in the 1870s, there is a renewed desire and renewed petitions to get Indians into Belize. The Toledo district, for instance, tries to get in touch with labor contractors in Jamaica to facilitate bringing in indentured servants into Belize. The censuses of the late 19th century also reflect an increase in the number of Indians in Belize. So the 1891 census, there are 291 Indians who appear in those censuses. So there is, in official numbers as well, there's a little bit of an increase in those later years. Now, this is one way in which the 1857 mutiny in India impacted Belize, right, with the importation of Indians into Belize. And what I want to characterize this response, right, is that it helps us to see Belize as having a kind of Caribbean response, right, a British Caribbean response to the uprising in India, which is getting labor into Belize.
Okay, so in her absence, I would like to say thank you very much to, and hopefully there's somebody here who can relay what we are saying here. So we would like to thank Dr. Dutt for what she put together for us. To be honest, as a descendant of indentureship, I did not know anything really about Sepoy. So this has been a very learning, an educational afternoon / night for me here. Okay, so we move on now to our second presenter. Now, our second presenter is no stranger at all. It's our very own Dr. Kumar Mahabir. Now, to give you some information for those of you who are, new to our show, especially our South African and European audience, I will introduce you to Dr. Mahabir. But before I do that, I want to acknowledge the presence of one particular person, and I will tell you who's, I had it saved, right? Please, I'm acknowledging the presence of Dr. Roger van Zannenburg. And he is the chairman of Pluto Educational Trust, and he's in the room here. So welcome, sir. Lovely to have you here. And the Pluto Educational Trust, as I would have mentioned earlier, hosts the Amina Gafur Institute. So thank you for your presence, sir. Welcome, and we hope to see you again in our following programs. So let me go on and tell you all about Dr. Mahabir. So Dr. Kumar Mahabir, he is from Trinidad, but he will focus on Guyana in his presentation now. He obtained his PhD in anthropology from the University of Florida. He is a former Organization of American States Fellow and Director of ICC and this Zoom program. Dr. Mahabir is the author of 12 books, including the national bestseller entitled Medicinal and Edible Plants Used by East Indians of Trinidad and Tobago. So welcome, Dr. Kumar. You know you have 15 minutes and the screen is yours. Go ahead.
Yes, right. So thank you, Bindu, and thank all of you who have assembled here. Today we have a small number today, but compared to last day when we had our meeting on South Africa, we had over 500 participants. So we definitely return to that topic in the next 2 weeks. Janine has already given you a date. My talk tonight is entitled Military Migrants from the Battlefields of India to the Cane Fields of Guyana. And this is a large project. It's part of a large project which is ongoing. So I'm just going to give you a taste of what I am working on. So the Sepoy Mutiny was a widespread but unsuccessful rebellion against British rule in India in 1857 to 58. You may say it was unsuccessful, but in a lot of ways it was successful. So that is debatable. And it was widespread because it was not only confined to particular areas. It is also called the Indian Rebellion or the First War of Independence. The uprising began with a mutiny of sepoys called Indian soldiers. Sipahi is the Hindi word of the British Army. So it was indeed not merely a mutiny, it was an Indian rebellion because people of all religions, Muslims included, and Hindus, and the high caste Hindus and the prominent Muslims took part in this fight against this war against the British. And it's the first war of independence because it really initiated that independence movement later. And one may say that Mangal Pandey, who we're going to see and talk about later, is the predecessor of Mahatma Gandhi. But what is significant is that, as Bindu had said, this mutiny took place in the middle of indentureship period, that immigration. Remember, indentureship started 1838 and 1917. This mutiny is 1857, right? 19 years after indentureship started. And what is also significant is that the mutiny began in the same places, the same areas, the same districts where most of the immigrants left for other parts of the British Empire. So obviously, there has to be some kind of connection. So this is a big paper. It's 22 pages long, single space. I can email it to those of you who are interested. And this is my research questions. So in the paper, I ask these questions and I address these questions in the paper. Some of these ex-soldiers legitimately migrate or secretly escape to the West Indies to flee persecution for mutiny. Now, that's an important phrase there, secretly escape. So bear that in mind as I proceed. And in the paper, I dealt with what memories exist or existed or have been transmitted about the presence of these veterans during indentureship in Guyana. So this part of the paper deals with Guyana. We had Dr. Dutt who spoke about Belize, and Mansraj, who is going to come after, is going to focus on Trinidad. I still have to do further research. I have to speak to the elderly folks in Guyana to find out if their grandparents mentioned anything about veteran soldiers, sepoys, sipahi to them. This is part of the ancestral memory that I'm going to investigate, part of oral history. And the other part of the paper, which is already written, I look at what literary texts have made references to or feature these former soldiers in the West Indies. So we don't have time. I am not going to address that aspect of the paper. But again, I have to do further research, particularly in Guyana. Which novel, Professor Davidine, which novel or anthology of poems or play mention anything or describe the presence of these former soldiers, these mutineers in Guyana? So it's an ongoing research. And it's a big paper, and I've sectionized it, 22 pages long, single space. And I have the abstract, the research question, limitations, delimitation, literature review. Dr. Samaru has written a lot about this, and Professor Jha. And I have followed up with other research, secondary research, particularly by Professor Crispin Bates and Marina Carter. And I talk about the methodology in the paper, which you can ask me in the Q&A, using oral history and using historical fiction to give a fuller range of the history. And the theoretical background, I can talk about that in the Q&A if you're interested, in which the theory I use is moving from the margin to the center, so that we do not, in this presentation and in the paper, we should not look at these indentured workers as mere laborers. Among those people who were coming, thousands of them, they were trained military fighters, right? Trained to kill. So I'm going to talk more about that. So the revolt was sparked by Mangal Pandey, a sepoy in the colonial British Army. Now remember, we have our own Pandey here in Trinidad, last name. And what are the connections? They are not related, but I mean, note the last name. Both of them were leaders in their own right. And the Pandey, even though he's old now, he looks as a military figure, walks briskly and so on. very active up to this day. And so the name Pandey is also Brahmin. And then there is also a woman, a warrior, named Rani Lakshmibai of Jhansi. And two movies have been made on these two warriors who fought against the British. Pandey was a sepoy, Rani was not, she was Queen of Jhansi. And two movies have been made of them. And I'm going to show the trailer at the end of my presentation, which is just about 2 minutes long. So you bear with me, right? So that there was supposed to be the trailer, but Ravin is going to show that. So I have estimated that the number of sepoys who immigrated to the West Indies voluntarily was escapees who were at least 20,000 of them, but they were disguised as laborers. What do I mean as disguised? They changed their caste before they registered in the depot in Calcutta or in Madras. They had to downgrade their caste. So actually there are more Brahmins in the Caribbean than we are led to believe, because the recruiters wanted laborers. They didn't want Brahmins so much, because Brahmin are not laborers. You want people to cut cane and so on and work in the cane field. So they had to disguise by downgrading their caste, changing their name and their profession, even their address, because they were wanted people. They were hunted. Remember, they fought, they murdered, they killed a lot of the British soldiers, and the British soldiers and the British government was not going to take that easily. So this figure of 20,000 ex-sepoys who came to the West Indies is based on the total of 400 indented immigrants who came to the West Indies, nearly 500,000 in all of the countries, and 70,000 sepoys who actively fought against the British. Now I want you to take note of that number, 70,000. And 10,000 veterans were proposed. There was a plan, but it didn't happen, to send these 10,000 veterans to Trinidad to work in the sugarcane plantation as indentured laborers. And it was recommended, note the word recommended, that 30,000 of them be exiled. We don't want them in India. They are dangerous people. They fought against us. They are not to be trusted. And they are killing machines. So you don't want the presence of these people in India again. And actually, a mere 3,000 was sentenced to imprisonment in the Andaman Islands. So minus 3,000 from 70,000. Where did these 63,000 sepoys go? That's the million-dollar question. So there was a threat of mutiny on board the class Meriden bound for Calcutta. So they were on the ships. There is evidence that some of the sepoys, ex-sepoys, mutineers, rebels were on the ship to Guyana. Remember, I'm focusing on Guyana only. My paper also deals with Trinidad. And there is evidence. What's going on here? It was discovered that the rebels were about 25 to 30 men who possessed evidence of military training, who may have probably belonged to the mutinous regiments or the rebel force, a fact which was generally carefully concealed by them, right? Again, look at the verb. The fact that they were ex-sepoys was concealed by them. They had to hide that fact because they would be arrested, they would be tried, they would be imprisoned, they would probably be hanged. It is also interesting to note that most of the passengers were from the belligerent Awadh and northwest provinces in India. Again, the same place where most of the migrants came from, right? Same area. So you see the connection. And again, I cite Bates, Crispin Bates, and Marina Carter voluminously in my research. Again, on the ship, the Bruce Fallas arrived in Guyana from Calcutta in 1858. A brief report appeared in the Guyana newspapers entitled "The Sepoys Are Come." That was the headline. The article stated, among the coolie immigrants recently arrived from Trinidad from Calcutta and the Bruce fellas has fled from India, right? What's the verb again? Fled from India. They said that they were ordered to shoot their white officers, but rather than do so, they ran away and immigrated. My internet is a little unstable, so you tell me when you're not hearing me. It is perhaps for these and other reasons that Guyana became the headquarters of the 2nd West India Regiment Police and was also guarded by the most heavily armed police in the British West Indies. So this is interesting. Compared to Trinidad, compared to Jamaica and so on, Guyana had the most heavily armed police in the British West Indies. Now, so we talk about the ships. They were identified on the ships. Some of them, not all of them. They were also identified in the estates. So there were more revolts and sugarcane plantations in Guyana by Indian laborers than any other colony, compared to Trinidad, compared to Jamaica, compared to Suriname. So that's the other area of research. Did the sepoys, ex-sepoys, rebels go to Suriname? That research has to be done. So there's a lot to be done. So, for example, in Lenora in 1869, 40 disgruntled laborers became violent against the deputy manager. So a lot has been written on that, those Lenora revolts. I know, for instance, one person is doing a PhD, an entire PhD dissertation is going to be done on that. But there are many chapters and research papers and so on done on the Lenora revolts. So in an article entitled Indian Militancy and Sugar Estates, the 1869 Lenora episode, historian Basdev Mongu wrote, so note that the title of this presentation, the title of this paper, the Indian Militancy. And let me go again. Right. So there was this riot there, and a detachment of police armed with a warrant arrived on the estate and attempted to arrest Lakshman Baldev Kodabakas for the assault on the deputy manager. They informed Bhagwan Singh, reported to be an ex-sepoy, that they only wanted the 3 accused. Instead, they were confronted with a crowd of roughly 300, armed largely with hakya sticks, and refused to surrender the accused. When one policeman aimed his gun at the crowd and pulled the trigger, which failed to go off, luckily, the crowd responded with a barrage of bottles and sticks. Now, what was significant, or what is significant about the Lenora Rebellion in 1869 is that the main bottle throwers were Indian women. So it is reported that the bottles were thrown in volleys of 50 and 60 at a time and replenished from supplies at a neighboring Portuguese shop. The police failed in their attempt to apprehend the accused, but soon returned with reinforcement from the same 2nd West Indian Regiment. So in many ways, the Indian women warriors in Guyana in 1869 were repeating the attacks of Rani Lakshmi Bai of Jhansi against armed British officers in Uttar Pradesh in India in 1857. This is quite symbolic, but there is a connection. So in the interest of time, I would end with a trailer, and this is where I'm going to end my presentation of the movie based on Rani Lakshmi Bai of Jhansi, and also that of Mangal Pandey. Each of these movie trailers are 2 minutes long, so just bear with me. I, as a teacher, as a lecturer, I use videos to teach. Almost 99% of lecturers and teachers use PowerPoint. I use videos. I show videos to my class, and we discuss the videos in the context of the module or the unit in the syllabus for that day. Okay, so Ravin, you're going to show the 2 trailers that are about 2 minutes long.
भारतवर्ष एक महान सभ्यता है जहां मिट्टी भी सोना थी और दिलों के दरवाजे हर मेहमान के लिए खुले थे। इन्हीं दरवाजों से एक दिन घुस आए कुछ क्रूर शैतानी इरादे। हिंसा और अत्याचार के सामने जब घायल हो रही थी हर आत्मा, तब इस मिट्टी के गर्भ से उठ खड़ी हुई मणिकर्णिका। लड़ी मर्दानी थी वो, झांसी वाली रानी थी वो।
Thank you very much
Okay.
for being participating. That's the end of my presentation.
Okay, so thank you very much, Dr. Mahabir. we looking at your table of contents, I can tell when the entire document is ready and all your necessary research is done and so on, it will be quite an intriguing piece of work to be read, especially in terms of a topic that is relatively new to many people, not all, many. Now, before we go on to our third and final presenter, I want to make reference to the chat. Now, ladies and gentlemen, what is always beneficial is to go through the chat during the course of the program, because here you can see people posting questions, sharing information. You don't have to be actively participating in it, but it is very enlightening. Now, one person's comment, Narendra said something in the chat, and I really respected it. He said, to all speakers and audience, I request with folded hands that please do not use the word mutiny for the 1857 Revolution of Independence. Anyone who fights for his independence is a freedom fighter, not a mutineer. Thanks. So, you know, of course, Narendra, I like what you said here. And, you know, and you said it, you know, with folded hands. So I did get your body language with it. So when I was looking at the definitions for each to make sure that I wasn't going to cross anything, a freedom fighter is, you can say that they are all similar, yes, because it is about revolting and rebellion, but freedom fighters are actually people who are revolting against oppression by those in power. So I like that, freedom fighters. So thank you, Narendra. So Dr. Kumar, once again, you always give us brilliant information, and we look forward to when you would be doing your next presentation. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we are moving on to our third and final presenter. And again, he is no stranger to this platform, Mr. Mansraj Ramphal. He's also from Trinidad and Tobago, and as Dr. Mahabir said before, he is going to be dealing with Trinidad in terms of the sepoys and so on. So let me give you some information about Mr. Ramphal. He is a human resource graduate of the University of the West Indies and the University of Warwick. He held senior positions in the petroleum industry and was heavily involved in youth motivation and development. And I think I know that this still continues to this time. Mr. Ramphal has delivered papers at several international conferences. He is now a postgraduate history student at the UWI St. Augustine campus. So Mr. Ramphal, I know you are always, you know, bursting with all this information. You have 15 minutes. Welcome. The screen is yours. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. My talk this evening is entitled Sepoy Migrants to the Caribbean During Indentureship, with special reference to Trinidad. If it is that I truly replaced Professor Bates at last minute notice, I feel very honored. I only had 2 days to prepare this 15-minute presentation. And I wish to thank Dr. Kumar Mahabir, who was for part of the time my supervisor at the UTT when I undertook some postgraduate studies there. I usually start with a little poem or a quote, so I will start with this one. And I've just entitled it at the top, Escape or Death. What kind plate? What kind cup with a ticket to cut in Trinidad, O people of India, we are going to die there. None other than Dr. Kumar Mahabir, The Still Cry. Still one of the best books on indentureship in Trinidad and indeed in the Caribbean, and I dare say in the diaspora. Madam Chair, both you and Dr. Mahabir have introduced the topic, so I will quickly move into the meat of the topic, and I'll start with the sepoys and the European soldiers. One of the things I have found about statistics is that every author has a different statistic quoted from different sources or compiled from different sources, sometimes simply excised from some historian's work somewhere or some report. So even when I quote the statistics, and Dr. Mahabir has done so quite effectively, you'll find some differences. And these statistics, hopefully we'll put them together into something that is more correct or reasonable at the end of the day. The British ruled India with an army of 277,746 men. 45,522 were European soldiers, mainly British, Scottish, Irish, and there were 235,224 of these were sepoys. Sepoy from Sipahi, native Indian soldiers. So it's interesting when the earlier chart you read says that these guys should not be called sepoys, but freedom fighters, and not mutineers, because how do you mutiny? How do you mutiny against your own self, against your own country, if you are Indian? And that is the question here. But we will use the word sepoys, we'll use the word mutineers for simplicity. And apart from that, the British rule the waves, as we all sang in colonial days. Rule Britannia, Britannia rule the waves. We Indians sang that here in Trinidad. Professor Samaru, who has supervised me for many years as well, will, I guess, have a good laugh at that. So the British Royal Navy had 240 ships and 40,000 sailors. In 1855, the 30,000 strong army of the Nawab of Awadh, or Oud as the English say, was disbanded. That was upon the annexation, call it conquest, of Awadh. Then 100,000 sepoy mutineers from the Bengal native infantry were disbanded after the mutiny in 1857. As Dr. Mahabir and Madam Chair, you pointed out, they came mainly from the northwest provinces, Awadh, North Bihar, northwest provinces, and Awadh are basically Uttar Pradesh today. So when you look on a map, you wouldn't find northwest provinces. Perhaps you wouldn't find Awadh, you'll find Uttar Pradesh. And in punishment for these sepoys, these mutineers, these freedom fighters, the British stopped the recruitment of sepoys from these areas, Uttar Pradesh and northern and western Bihar. Instead, they recruited the Sikhs and the Gurkhas and others who were loyal to them, loyal to the British in the 1857 revolt. And hence the revolt did not succeed. And this is why we are here in Trinidad, 147,000 of us. That is, we came here as war refugees. We left India because there was no place for us. The sepoy were put on boats, and those who remained in India starved with their families. Their lands were taken away, as Dr. Mahabir mentioned, and starving and dying in India. They too were forced to migrate and come to Guyana, Trinidad, the British West Indies, and the rest of the Caribbean here, and mainly to Mauritius. I heard it mentioned that perhaps in Guyana they do not acknowledge the fact that the sepoys were there. But I have heard in many seminars the role of the sepoys in the strikes and so on, particularly the non-pareil strike 1896, where the revolt, the riots, the strike was led by ex-sepoys. And well, eventually some of them were killed and so on. But during question time, I'll be talking to Dr. Mahabir about Guyana. So they stopped recruiting these sepoys. They starved them. And as Dr. Mahabir has correctly pointed, 70,000 left India. My own view, it could be as much as 120,000. But this is where the research has to be done. And universities in the Caribbean and so on must encourage the study of indentureship. So some of the districts I will quickly mention, and some of them have become place names in Trinidad. And it is useful to check here. And Professor Samaru, as always, has led from in front. And he has pointed out that in Barrackpore is actually named after Barrackpur in India, where mutineers struck, and mutineers, ex-mutineers arrived in Trinidad and named that little place Barrackpore, now one of the largest villages in Trinidad. But there were others like Basti. So for instance, Basta Hall in Sevilla next to the factory is named after Basti. Kampu in Kunopia is named after Kanpur in India. Interestingly enough, where my paternal great-grandfather came from. I do not know if they had roles in the revolts or as sepoys or whatever, but I know on both sides they had good reason to leave India because of poverty and coming to look here for a better life. Similarly, on my maternal grandfather's side, when I was very young, I asked him, why didn't you all fight back? Why didn't great-grandfather and great-grandfather fight back? And he told me that great-grandfather had encased his sword in the mud walls of his little mud hut in Ghazipur, another place of revolt. So my roots come from Ghazipur on one side and Kanpur on the other side. Interestingly, both places of revolt, so I may have to do some checking. Other areas that the Indians came from were Allahabad, Azamgarh, Ara, Shahabad, Saran, Patna. We have Patna village in Digo Martin. Interesting, we'll have to check and see if it was named by sepoys. And as we see, as we already saw, these large districts were heavily involved in the mutiny. The British West Indies, as Dr. Mahabir pointed out, the West Indies as a whole received over 400,000 Indians, and of course, among them were sepoys. British Guyana, 239,909. Trinidad, 147,592. Jamaica, 37,027. St. Lucia, 4,561. And I have checked these myself. That is, I've checked the statistics, and these are correct. St. Lucia, 4,561. Grenada, 3,529. British Honduras, 3,000. But another 3,000 would have come from the mutiny, which I had intended to ask the first speaker about. Unhappily, she's not here. But actually, 1,000 Indian sepoys were transported, just like prisoners from England transported to Australia. They were transported with their wives and their children to Belize. And they didn't go initially to the sugar areas. Those were not yet built. Sugar estates were not yet in play. They all went into the forestry department, man and wife and child, to work. But Mr. Pitt, who is from Belize, and Sylvia, who is from Belize, will help us out in the question time as to where they ended up.
Mr. Ramphal, I'm sorry
yeah.
to interrupt. You have 3 minutes again, okay?
Certainly.
Yeah.
So St. Vincent, 2,523. St. Kitts, 361. St. Vincent, 2,523. And Nevis, which is left out in most statistics, 342. Antigua wanted Indians, and Tobago wanted Indians. They got none. Cuba wanted 100,000 Indians. They got 150,000 Chinese transported in Indian boats instead. Let's move on to Trinidad now in terms of figures. In the period 1850 to 1856, and most of these statistics comes from the actual records of emigration from the ports of Calcutta. For the ports of Madras and so on, it's much more difficult. But we have to keep in mind that in Trinidad, 6% of the Indians came from Madras. During the 3-year period, 1854 to 1856, only 636 Indians came each year, each of those years. 636 each year. But during the next 3-year period, up to 1857, the year of the mutiny, 2,935 Indians came each year. In 1858 alone, 4,448 Indians arrived in Trinidad, a very significant spike caused, as Dr. Mahabir said, by the Indian mutiny itself. And among these would have been a significant amount of sepoys, because they would have belonged to the Brahmin caste, the Brahmin and the upper caste, the Chatris and the Rajputs and so on. And those always numbered consistently around 20% of the population that migrated. So there's no doubt that in Trinidad as well, as Dr. Mahabir has pointed out, and certainly in Guyana, we know the Guyanese history even better, because the Guyanese historians, Mangru, Singh, and those guys have written very well and researched very well. And we need similar researchers in Trinidad. And from Uttar Pradesh, the share of Indians out of 100%, these were the figures: 1888, 63.7%, and 1896, 81.0%. Always, as I say, these figures could be a little bit higher. The sepoys who came here were actually hidden among the Brahmins, the priests, and the sadhus, because that was their caste, that was their profession. They had left that to go and fight for the British, strangely enough, against their own Indian people. And then their own Indian people fought against them. And here we are in Trinidad, Mauritius, which received almost 500,000 Indians. And the Sepoy history is very strong there. So the Indians here would have been among the agitators on the estates, and we still have to do that research. Professor Samaru, again, has been the leader in that respect, not only in the Caribbean, but in the Atlantic world. He's a leader in terms of diaspora research, Indian indentureship, and we need some followers to this great leader we have. And he has reported, as I said, that in Barakpur, he found descendants of the Indian sepoys. He mentioned as well that on the hill, when he wrote on his visit to Aruca, he spoke to a group of sepoys. The fellas does it when they realize this is an Englishman, and perhaps they could end up in jail. And the fear of the sepoys, and I'll round up now, I know it's about time. The fear of the sepoys in Trinidad was very real, because in newspapers, the planters always raised a phantom, a specter, a Frankenstein, that these Indians would kill them. But the things that the Indians in Trinidad were noted for was killing out their wives and their girlfriends and leaving less women available to the Indians, 4 men to one woman. In the early days, on the Fatel Rozak, it was 11 men to 1 woman. And in the later days, 2 men to 1 woman. So the white guys, the planters, were very, very afraid. And as I will end with this, as Professor Samaru pointed out, the grand finale here ended up with the 1884 strikes and the Jose riots, where 22 Indians were killed, that is on the spot. Others went home to die in their houses. Others ran into the bush and were shot in the back. Here, right here in San Fernando, where I live, that research still has to be done. And among the 100 people I've interviewed so far, only 3 barely remember their grandfathers talking about the Jose shoot. And this was worse than any one incident in Guyana. 22 people were shot dead on the spot. Murder, I say, not mutiny, not Galba Hoga, as Suku, the leader, said, Galba Hoga, mutiny, murder at Cipero Cross, San Fernando. I thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so thank you very much, Mr. Ramphal. I am very, very pleased with what you shared here, because I have grown up hearing so many arguments that Brahmins and the Kshatris and Sadhus and stuff could not have possibly come down as indentured laborers, that all the descendants of laborers of indentureship would have been criminals, they would have been the people only of the lower caste and so on. And this is something that I have lived with. This information here provided by this afternoon/tonight's panel discussion and yours, including yours, is really, really enlightening information, because it makes sense. And historically, you even see the British, the different European royalty, the monarchs, they would send to exile their own to different islands and different countries throughout the world, banish them. And so that whole thing of sending those who are seen as traitors or possible opposition, they would be banished to different lands throughout the world and in lands that they would expect them to struggle and so on. So I really am very, very grateful for the information that I have received here this afternoon, especially given my title that I have grown up with. So thank you all again.
So,
Now,
Madam Chair, I would just want to add, as you've made that point, our history here is clouded in myths, myths. The bad parts of the history have been sanitized or hidden by our grandparents. Yeah?
yeah.
Uxoricide and so on was commonplace, as it still is. But let me just deal with the statistics because I have checked them against all the records from the books, Donald Wood, Hitchens report, the Grierson report, the Geoghan
Can we
report,
take some questions?
and
Steve,
many
can we take some
reports.
questions?
Yeah, I just want to make the quick point, Dr. Mahabir,
Yeah.
that 20%, and I want to comment on your point as well, 20% of the Indians who came here were Brahmins, Kshatris, Rajputs, but another percentage, which you mentioned,
Okay.
which we do not know, came in addition to that 20%. They changed their names. And then 32% were agriculturalists. And then the rest, so more than half were agriculturalists, middle class, and high caste, 50%.
Okay. So thank you. Thank you for
Thank
the
you.
additional
Thank you very much.
information. Lovely having you here again. And
Certainly.
folks, now we move on to our question and answer segment, of which I would have asked you all at some point to go to the reaction button and raise your hands. Now I saw Narinder, his hand had gone up, but I think I'm not seeing Narinder's hand anymore. And I think I would have dealt perhaps the comment that I made. Okay, so Narinder, hi, namaste. Now, so let us just be as brief as possible. And is it a question or is it a comment? Sir?
This is a comment.
Okay, so I'll give you a minute to make the comment because we short on time as usual, right? Go ahead, sir.
Thank you very much. It hurts me that if someone called 1857 mutiny, it was not mutiny. It was fight for independence. So why don't we call independence movement or revolution anything? But people call it mutiny. That hurts me. That's not the appropriate word. At least we should not use. Others are using. Let them go to hell. But we should, with both folded hands, say, please don't call it mutiny. In an independence revolution. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you
so
again.
let me respond to that. Yes, I agree with you. It was freedom fighters. They were freedom fighters. And it was, as I said before, this fight, this war against the British was not only confined to the sepoys. They started this, they ignited it, and it became widespread that even civilians were fighting against the British in various ways.
Yes,
Okay.
anybody fighting for his country or his rights or interest is never called mutineer. Is called freedom fighter or fighting for his rights. Thank you very much.
Okay, so thank you very much. I would now take I'm seeing I have Sylvia from Belize. Sylvia, are you still here?
She was here.
Okay, so
can you unmute?
while we do Dr. Tara Singh, and then we will go with Mike Singh and Boise Siu. So Dr. Tara Singh.
I just want to make a comment quickly. Firstly,
And I saw
I thank all the presenters. I've learned quite a lot. This is a comment referring to Dr. Kumar, referring to the Rani of Jhansi. I don't know if you had a look at Naipaul novel, which is basically facts and fiction combined. He has an excellent account of this. Perhaps it may be worthwhile if you didn't read it, you should check it out. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, great. Mr. Mike Singh, are you there?
Unmute.
Okay,
Yes,
Mr.
unmute. Mike Singh, unmute. Okay.
Okay, great.
Yeah, he's there now.
Namaste, everyone. Salam alaikum. Dr. Mahabir, first and foremost, thank you for putting this together. Everything you have revealed here confirms exactly with what was passed down from one generation of mine orally and in written format. It confirms everything about my ancestors coming from India in chains in 1858, being brought to Haiflat, and then a few generations after, my grandfather returning to India and becoming a general in the Indian National Army with Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose. We have in our possession documentation that states we must return to India because Guyana is only temporary. So many of my cousins and so on are all moving back to India. We have no desire to remain in Guyana or anywhere in the Caribbean as India rises. We were brought here not by our own doing, and so many persons of Sepoy, well, a freedom fighter, Azadi, will return to India. This was just temporary. India is going to rule the world, and I'm very happy, Dr. Mahabir, that you've done so much research. I've got access to the archives of Gelanders and Arbutut, the big recruiters. So if you would like to get access to it, I know the CEO, and they're willing to open up those archives. And I hope those can help you through my good offices.
Yes, thank you very much. So email me and
okay.
I will like to get those documents, please.
Thank you, and thank you so much.
Great.
This is the best show. Thank you.
No problem, and welcome. We appreciate your presence here. We look forward to seeing you again. Now we move on to Mr. Boise Siu. Mr. Siu. Okay, so while we're waiting on that,
Boise, can you unmute, please?
Because his mic camera is off, I can't tell if he's there or not. So, Mr. Siu, if you're hearing us, I'll get back to you. And after Mr. Gabriel Pate has said his very brief piece, go ahead.
Tell everybody get off the internet.
Okay. Yes, Mr. Pate. Miss Sylvia, I'll get back to you in 1 minute, ma'am. Can I take Mr. Pate's question? Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. I want to thank Dr. Mahabir for this very, very interesting session today. I learned quite a bit myself. I did not know that many of the sepoys came disguised as indentured workers. I would have wanted the first presenter to have been here. I think her name was Dr. Dot.
Yes.
Yes.
Right. And she was saying that, and I presume she said Parliament, and I believe it was the British Parliament that she was talking about, approved 1,000 sepoys for Belize. And I was wondering about that because I have not seen any documentary or documented evidence to suggest that they actually came. Maybe the British Parliament did approve it, but I haven't seen any evidence that these sepoys actually came to Belize. I mean, if 1,000 sepoys had come to Belize, the Indian population in Belize would have been a lot larger, in my view. I stand to be corrected.
Okay, so all right, so thank you. Go ahead.
That was a recommendation. That was a plan for the 1,000 sepoys and their families to be sent, to be deported to Belize, but it didn't come to pass.
It didn't come to pass.
No.
Okay.
Okay.
Because
yes.
But
I
some
do
of them would have,
remember.
some of them would have gone secretly by changing their identity.
okay, I understand.
And
Okay.
Sylvia has some evidence, so maybe she
Yeah.
might want to talk
Yeah.
now.
Go ahead.
Okay. So, Miss Sylvia, welcome. Go ahead, ma'am. You can go ahead.
Hello.
Hi.
Yes, thank you. I am wanted to add to what Mr. Pitt had mentioned, because the first presenter, Dr. Dut, mentioned about the 1,000 sepoys, but I am more working on the words transported, brought, approved. So until Dr. Mahabir just now said deported. So I was wondering which of those. Were they brought voluntary or were they deported? Because the others use the word approved, transported, or brought. But Dr. Mahabir used the word that I think would be more appropriate of deported. In growing up, we have lost many of our cultural information, and it's difficult to retrieve. But my mom used to tell me about my grandfather or her dad being brought to Belize as a baby from Jamaica. I did not get to know him, but I found his grave, and on his grave marked born 1945. Sorry, died 1945 and born 1872. So for that, I kind of put together and said, okay, he came in the first flow when they were recruiting from Jamaica. I did not get to know him, but my brother, my elder brother, I asked him one day to describe how my grandfather had looked. And so he said he was fair-skinned, hazel eyes, and he wore his mustache with a curl on both sides. He wore a long shirt, and what they always wondered was why he wore something like a boots, but it was not really a boots. It was something he said that the cricketers would use around from their ankle to their knees, but it was laced up. And the description kind of gave me a kind of look of a soldier. I did not know him. So I was just wondering if he could have been a descendant of, or his parent or his father was one of the sepoy, and that's why he dressed that way. I do not know. I have not found any research or any kind of information written in our family. It's just what was told to me.
Okay. All right, Sylvia. Thank you. Dr. Kumar or Mr. Ramphal, are there anything that you would like to say?
No, let's hear from let's hear.
Yes,
I think there are a couple
I want to add. I just want to add because it's rather interesting what we are saying. But what I have said, that is 1,000 sepoys and their families were transported to Belize, is actual fact, and it is documented in the books. And I'll give you shortly the names of 2 books and the pages from which you could get it. I happen to be in my library right here. So I'll give you those. And I understand the records were taken by those authors from the archives early century. Yeah. So there's no question in my mind.
Okay, so what you could do, you could type out.
Sorry, they were transported. And then concerning what Sylvia says, Sylvia, nice to see you after these years. We've had many conferences together. So the Indians did come from via Jamaica to Belize, because Belize was like a ward, a second country to Jamaica. And between 1872, which year you mentioned, and 1884, 3,000 Indians came to work on the estates. I would, and you could bail me out, most of them went back to Jamaica. Remember when we were there traveling on the bus, Indians went to Guatemala and so on. Your cousins and they would have told me that. So I'll just get those two book names, and Madam Chair, I also have a question comment later.
Okay, good. Yes, I have two persons ahead of you, and then I'll take your question. Okay, so thank you, Ms. Sylvia. I hope that that would have been of some assistance. Now we move on to Dr. Beturam to make a very brief comment. Is Dr. Beturam here, sir? Okay, so in the meanwhile, we will move on to Mr. Mr. Gobal. Mr. Gobal, can you let me glad. Can you tell me your name, sir? I don't want to do it any injustice.
Yeah. Thank you very much for giving me a few seconds for my comments. First, about my name. You know certainly Gopal and Gopal Krishnan, written in English. Huh? Well, Gopal is a well-known name, and I am from Pondicherry.
Right.
So the name is written in the French spelling. I read it as Gopal Krishnan. In Tamil, we say Gopal Krishnan. So if you read it in English, they say Gopal Krishnan. It doesn't mean anything. Okay. So I'm from Pondicherry. I am Tamilian, but I'm a historian doing research in 18th century about the French rivalries between the French and the British between 1763, Treaty of Paris, to 1801. Okay. Well, I know a little bit about the migrants to the French Caribbean, not migrants to the British Caribbean. So I am learning so much with these webinars coordinated with Mr. Dr. Kumar Mahavir. Thank you all. And the comment, I have one comment still, not comment, but one question. How is it possible that Brahmins could go along, could go out of India? Because my professor in the French college, French lycée, we call it now, French College of Pondicherry, they said, we are born Hindu, we cannot become Hindus. But my question is about the Brahmins who could have gone abroad. Thank you.
Okay, so question is, Brahmins how would they have gone abroad? That's your comment. But I'm still unclear as to your question. Are there conditions or criteria that would have disallowed them to go abroad? Firstly, would there have been that?
Sorry.
No, your question, I think something is, to me, it's kind of missing, because were there any stipulations that would have prevented Brahmins from going abroad, firstly?
Yes, they were not allowed. There was a restriction. So there is several problems for Southeast Asia. But I don't want to go beyond the subjects of today, you see?
Okay.
So, okay.
I understand.
Yeah,
thank you. Right, lovely. So, you know what, I look at indentureship, and when I look at this now tie in, so I can have this intersect now with the sepoys, and the root cause of this mass emigration from India was because of the pillaging of the economy by the British. So people would have lost their wealth, they would have lost their property, they would have lost their assets. There were famines, there were genocides. It doesn't matter. Kings, you see historically, kings and queens and princes running off into exile to other countries. So, in my opinion, when it comes to life and death of you and your family and mere survival, I don't think like anything about being in a stratified society would have said, hey, you know, I'm not allowed to. That's how I look at it. That's my personal take on it. So I'm seeing that we have interest in the chat for follow-up discussions on these freedom fighters and these rebellions and so on. So perhaps more details can come in from those programs if they come up. Now, Mr. Boise Seal, are you there? Because I think it's about time to close up. So thank you again, Mr. Gopala Krishna, whose name is written spelled in French, and I would not have ever known that, right? So yes, are there any questions? Okay, so before
Madam Chair, remember I asked that I had.
Oh yes, Mr. Ramphal, go ahead.
All right. So one of the thing about history and the whole question of beliefs, let me just quote it, and you have to give me the time. Kaiga, in his book, British Honduras, Past and Present, and those who wish to learn could read it, because I read it 6 years ago when I went to Belize to present this paper, and it says, after the suppression of the Indian Mutiny, Parliament, that is British Parliament, transported 1,000 sepoys. Fact, right? With their wives and families. So that's at least 3,000, given one wife and one child. Yeah, that's fact. And it's cited by Burden, B-U-R-D-O-N, in another book. And they arrived in 1858. That's the same year of the mutiny. And then Grant, in the Making of Modern Belize, and these two books are available at UWI's library, right? States that this was more to solve Britain's governmental problem than the woodcutters in forestry. And as I said, they went into the forest to work.
Okay, what's the name? What's the name of that book, sir?
Second book, C.H. Grant, The Making of Modern Belize.
Right.
And it says this was the British government solved their own problem, that is how to deal with the sepoys.
Okay, good.
How to deal with forestry.
Right.
Mr. Pate, in your country, the Chinese also went into forestry, and Chinese men and Chinese women were engaged in the hard work of forestry. And as Koreans, we must check the sources. The sources are here. I do not speak off the top of my hat, right? I use the sources. I do not have the time in 15 minutes to say Mr. Burton said that, Mr. Grant said that, Mr. Kaiga said that. But
yes.
I am a historian in training, and I will use my training to arrive at results. The figures given on caste are actually in the original records from the Bengal Immigration Department. I have all the records in my possession, and I give you those, and they are cited in a dozen and more books.
Okay.
Included by Professor Bates. Yeah.
Okay.
So Bindu, if I may say
that's
something.
What's that, sir?
If I may say something.
Of course, go ahead.
So there seems to be a contention that whether 1,000 ex-sepoy and their families were deported or sent to Belize or not. We have to also make a distinction between primary sources and secondary sources. But I am not disputing what Mr. Manshraj is citing. But Dr. Dot, she's a specialist in the Belize India connection. She reads these Hispanic languages, and she has said it was a plan. That was a plan, it was intended, but it never happened. So I'm saying let's not take sides on this, and let's look at the primary document, and let's look at other sources. Thank you.
Right. So these secondary
Okay, so
sources, yeah, let me just make the quick point. The secondary sources use the primary sources in the Belize archives at that time to arrive at this, and they said so. Yeah.
So
okay,
okay,
so thank you,
Sylvia, Sylvia and Gabriel Pate, both of you were born and live in Belize. Can you check that? You will have the final say, and you come back to us.
I have seen no evidence that
okay,
the
so
Belize.
guys, this is I would like to say that I'm very intrigued by the questions. What questions? That's the root of what drives us, and that births so many research and findings. So this interest in knowing what and the number and if Sepoy based or not and so on, it's really something that is impacting on some of us, especially the Belizeans. So I think that this is something that Dr. Kumar will surely be looking at to have further discussions with. All right, ladies and gentlemen, so thank you for your presence here tonight. I just want to make one very, very short comment. There are two comments concerning the session supporting casteism, and if that is being validated among Indian churches through this conversation, and I think that's something that we need to be mindful of, because at the end, India was a stratified space, further stratified by the British. So when people came here, there would have been a hierarchy, there would have been hegemony, and there would have been stratification. So obviously, but we are not saying that we endorse anything, and that's a strict disclaimer from us here at ICC, disclaiming that we are supporting any notions of stratifications among indentures and casteism. Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, I thank you all so heartily for being here this afternoon / tonight. It was a pure pleasure having you here and listening to this wonderful information that has added a little more fire to my soul about my history and my ancestry. I thank you. And now I pass you on over to Janine Gilhari from Belize to close off our program for this afternoon / tonight. Janine?
Unmute. Okay.
Yeah. Thank you, Bindu. Thank you for being an excellent moderator once again. You always do an amazing job. Thank you to everyone for taking the time to participate, especially the presenters, to the planning and advisory team led by Dr. Kumar Mahabir. As you know, this is a team effort directed by the people in the Indian diaspora. So Dr. Tara Singh from New York, Brian Rampal from California, Kaz Raj from Florida, Cliff Rajkumar from Canada, Jay Sears from Grenada, Satsuk Deo and Shalima Mohammed from Trinidad, Sadhana Mohan and Dio Sharma from Suriname, and many others, especially also to everybody who was in the question and answer section. You know, it was a lot of interaction today, so that's amazing. And also, let's not forget our IT manager behind the scenes. So Ravid Ramsingh, thank you for all that you do, you know, with the recording the program, uploading it for posterity to YouTube and Facebook and so forth. Now, as I have said before, this public meeting is being hosted by the Indo-Caribbean Cultural Center and the Amina Ghafoor Institute for the Study of Indentureship and its Legacies. So please feel free to contact the ICC to publish your books, magazines, and reports, and send us your email and WhatsApp so we can, you know, continue to build our database. And in order to continue our program, once again, I ask everyone to send any opinions, comments you might have on how we can improve. And also, if a donation is within your reach, please contact Dr. Mahabir for these details. And our topic next Sunday is a review of the first anniversary of the new PPPC government in Guyana. So once again, I invite everybody to please like and share our Facebook page and continue to join our meetings. I'm Janine Buhari from Belize. So thank you for everything, and God bless you all. Danya Vet.